Okay, so we're gonna be focusing on the first session of the reading
Yes.
lesson plan for next week. So, what are you teaching?
So next week we are going to be teaching poetry, and students are going to be developing their general understanding of the elements of poetry.
Okay, so we're gonna focus on that first session that we have on the lesson plan, and I made you a copy
Yes, I need that.
so that
you.
we can see, kind of walk through the lesson plan and see where maybe we can adjust to make
Yes,
the
of
learning
course.
experience better. So let's start off with what is the objective of the lesson?
So the objective of the lesson is for students to do a close reading on a poem and identify their figurative language as they're reading, as well as key vocabulary that would help them understand the poem.
Okay, and were you able to come up with an exit ticket that matched the rigor of the assess or the goal of the assessment?
As of right now, our exit ticket will be where students will be able to practice the same skills independently and answer a few questions that pertain to the poem.
Okay, so students will be using a different poem to practice those skills, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then I see that you added some visuals. That is really good. I think that's gonna help a lot of students that, aren't able to look at in-depth
Yes, absolutely.
things. Mm-hmm.
And
All right. All right. And then for your independent practice, I wanted you to talk a little bit more about how that's going to look, what the students are expected to do.
So students are going to be grouped based on their level of reading, and they're going to be dissecting a different poem, and that we're not using for whole group instruction, and they're going to be able to answer questions that are on a sentence strip.
Okay. All right. And then are you planning on modeling that skill, or how are you going to prepare the students to be successful in that?
So first we're going to do a whole group instruction where students are going to be able to dissect the poem together with me. We're going to annotate and circle unknown words, probably talk about figurative language and study their background knowledge. And then they should be able to apply that during independent tests.
Okay. I also printed out the end of the unit assessment so that we could kind of look at that and see that our goals for each session are leading the students to success at the end of the unit. So if you could kind of look through the questions and see what questions would they be able to answer just after that first session.
I mean, hopefully they can answer question 11, which talks about identifying the meaning of the word. This is something that we are going to be hitting on during whole group instruction because students continue to struggle with vocabulary.
Okay.
Um,
So we're thinking
question 11
assessment
should be
question.
successful.
Okay.
I'm thinking question 13 might be a bumpy question, just because of the way the question is reworded. What idea does the poet convey? Again, if students are not familiar with the vocabulary of the word convey, then they might not know how to answer that question.
So then what are you going to do to try to prepare them for that type of question?
Maybe expose them to STAR vocabulary.
Okay.
That can help them be successful when they take the exit ticket, the post assessment.
Yeah. I would also maybe recommend that you input that type of vocabulary in an exit ticket prior to the unit. That way they are exposed to that vocabulary on their own as well.
That's a good idea. Let me take notes.
You're more than welcome to write on that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Good.
All right. And then any other question that you saw?
I think read this line from the first stanza. I think students should be able to go back and identify their stanzas if we learn how to properly label each stanza and they understand the difference between a stanza and a paragraph.
Yes. I think that'll be something that you're gonna have to like explicitly teach, just because they have been confused of when a paragraph starts, when a paragraph ends.
Yes. This one where it says read these lines from the poem. I think sometimes students do not go back to find evidence from the passages. So I think that they might be quick to just choose an answer based on what they know rather than going back to find evidence.
Okay. And something like this, how would you model that for the students?
I think as we are going over questions and answers from the independent practice, having me saying, go back to your poem and read the evidence strictly from it.
Okay.
And kind of making them pinpoint that evidence within their poem.
Okay. I think that's a good plan. And then I know on the other sessions, you're probably going to hit on the other questions that are on that assessment. On the lesson plan, you also put some sentence stems that the students can use. Are you planning on having that, visual for the students, or how are you planning for the students to use those?
Because I have so many ELLs and SPIT students in my classroom, I'm hoping to write these down on a sentence strip and having them posted like up on the whiteboard, or so that students can become familiar again with the STAR vocabulary and know what's expected of them to answer whenever they see these questions.
Okay, I think that sounds good. And then just to kind of reiterate, is the end assessment, so the part that you're actually going to look at to see if the students were getting the goal of the first session, is that going to match what the goal is?
I mean, I think so. I think if students are able to do the post-assessment successfully, then it will give me a clear understanding that, number one, students know the elements of poetry and how to identify a poem and pretty much understand the meaning of one.
Okay, sounds good. All right, well, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to kind of meeting again and kind of dissecting the lesson, what worked, what didn't work, and if we need to kind of come up with like a reteach plan to make sure that the students are understanding the standards.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.